The government may have promised the biggest growth in social house building in a generation, but there is a major challenge to make current housing habitable before any new homes are built. Sky News has been speaking to a mother in East London whose council flat is in such a bad condition that it is making her children sick. And whilst the local council has apologised, it's a problem being faced by tenants in social housing up and down the country. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson has this story.
This is Waltham Forest in East London, a place with one of the longest waiting lists for council housing in the country. Thousands are desperate for a flat in blocks like these, but we've been inside and found a snapshot of Britain's housing crisis.
You got this?
Yeah.
You don't want to touch the damp?
It's cold and mouldy in this flat. The damage has been caused by a persistent leak. It's been like this for 8 years.
That is the girls' room. At the bottom is all mouldy. So the paint has come off. We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
For years, they've been begging the council to fix it. Life like this is all her daughters can remember.
They grow up watching this grow with them as well. Do you know how sad that is?
I can't breathe that much.
Since a baby?
Yes, since a baby.
When I see news that someone's died because they're breathing, it scares me, and I think of my kids at that point. But then I sit there and I think, but who's there to help me? I've got no one to help me. You want to jump off?
They feel trapped, as before moving in here, they were homeless.
Where am I going to go? They want us to live in hell, that's what it is. They want us to live in misery.
This is when it's like really bad. It was like,
Water just pouring in.
Yeah.
That's how Ahmed felt too when water poured in through his ceiling on and off for a year, forcing him to turn off the electricity for weeks at a time.
Just coming out of these areas here, just completely seeping out, and it would come directly down to the switches. But the worst part is that it could go through the actual piping, so it would go on the inside without us seeing it at all. So switching it on was just a complete hazard.
An NHS worker, Andrea, who's disabled, sometimes struggles to get to her flat on the 11th floor.
The lifts is the biggest nightmare. I've had to spend a couple of nights not here because I couldn't get in there.
How often do they break down?
Too often.
Earlier this year, flammable cladding was removed from the buildings, but it hasn't yet been replaced, so they've been left with no insulation.
It's freezing, you know. So throughout Christmas, we're just, literally left to freeze. The scariest winter we're going to have to go through living in these buildings.
Balcony walls have had to be removed too. Some, like Steve on the 5th floor, have been left with just a flimsy barrier.
This is the gap that leaves in between.
Are you worried about your children when they're out on the balcony?
Well, definitely, I can't let them come out here. This is a no-go.
Waltham Forest Council insists the work is being carried out safely. They are, however, unable to say when the buildings will be re-insulated. They say they respond to concerns in a timely manner and they apologise to Faz, saying they'll arrange an urgent inspection of her flat.
I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my 2 girls. Then I feel like maybe they will take this serious.
Residents feel ignored, but the severe housing shortage means they have no other options. The government has made social house building a key priority, but the experience of people here raises questions about whether existing homes are fit for purpose. Becky Johnson, Sky News, East London.
Well, I want to pick up on that final point that Becky Johnson made there in her report with Susanna Mooner, Secretary of the Social Housing Action Campaign. Susanna, good of you to join us tonight. Just listening to what Becky said at the end there, I mean, the government have said, and I'll quote them here, they're committed to the biggest growth in social and affordable housing in a generation, which sounds good. We do need more social housing, but we also need, as Becky Johnson's report shows there, to make good on the housing that's already available.
That's absolutely right. I think that was the most powerful point made in the film, really, is that the focus is on house building. And what we're going to see is a continuation of the neglect of the condition of housing that already exists. And for years now, we've been, hearing these stories. These stories are coming out about terrible, terrible disrepairs. But there's so little focus on that now. When the regulator recently published a report which said that around 13,000 social housing homes fail the decent home standard and are not up to the decent home standard. 5,200 of those are exempted from the decent home standard, so they don't even have to be brought up even to that very basic standard of living that makes a home habitable. And we think there needs to be a lot more focus on actually making sure that the homes that people are in are habitable, because they not only does it destroy people's lives. I mean, we heard the terrible stories in your report there, but it also costs the NHS a huge amount of money. For example, it's such a waste of human lives and of money when it comes to not keeping the homes in good repair.
Susanna, the residents of that block of flats, they're absolutely desperate. And that's just one block of flats. There are hundreds more up and down the country in the same state of disrepair. Uninhabitable, really.
Yeah.
Faz Begum there and her girls in Becky's report, something that struck me was when she said, I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my girls for someone to actually do something about this. But we have had tragedies like that before. We've had Grenfell, and there are tower blocks without insulation now because the cladding's been taken off and not replaced, so people are going to be really cold this winter. We've had young Awab Ishak, the little boy who died because of mould in his social housing. So these bad things have already happened, but nothing seems to have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to ask yourself what is missing here, and where the gap is with enforcement. The laws that say that if a landlord is charging rent, they have to provide housing of a decent standard. So it has to be habitable. So the laws are there, but it's very, very difficult for tenants and residents to actually be able to enforce that law. There is no agency that exists at the moment that can come in on any kind of, with any kind of speed where a home is in a state of dilapidation and order the landlord to put it right and force the landlord to do that if they don't do it within a timely manner. What happens instead is you have to go through the internal complaint system, then you need to go to the ombudsman or take a case to the court. All of that takes a huge amount of time. And when you do end up in court, you're sitting on one side with, either self-representing or with a no-win, no-fee lawyer, or, maybe having found some free legal advice somewhere, because you can't get legal aid for a lot of these cases. And on the other side, the landlord turns up with a handful of solicitors, their full-time staff, working in their legal team, a barrister able to help them. So they are able generally to run rings around the tenants and residents. It's very, very difficult for people to actually go in and get any kind of enforcement. And it can't be left to individuals, as we saw with Grenfell, as we saw with Awab Ishak, and we see every day with all of these tragedies. There was a story earlier last week about a woman who climbed out onto her roof ledge and fell to her death. She was just 37 years old, but her guttering had been fixed with sort of sticky tape by her landlord, Hackney Council. And she was so fed up with the damp and mould that it was causing to have the leaks come in that she tried to fix it herself. And we aren't going to see an end to these stories until we really get some proper enforcement in place. We need to build that tenant and resident power, but we also need to see action from government on the enforcement side, not just on the legislation.
Yeah. Hackney Council aren't here to respond to that story. I should just point that out. But Susanna, a final point. Is this just blatant discrimination for people who are in social housing? Because again, we're hearing in Becky's report, people feeling that they don't have a voice. The attitude appears to be, you're lucky you've got this house or this flat. There's nowhere else for you. And we again heard that in the report into Grenfell. The residents of Grenfell kept trying to talk about the fact that their building was unsafe and nobody listened.
Yeah, I think it's the tenants and residents who don't have a voice, and I think that extends way beyond just the social housing tenants and residents, although they tend not to have a lot of other resources that might be available to people to try and get justice when they have a housing problem. But private landlords are just as bad. Maybe those stories don't hit the headlines as much because people maybe there is a perception that actually social housing should be in better condition. We don't expect social landlords to be providing substandard housing, and therefore it seems even more shocking. And maybe that's why those stories tend to hit the headlines a bit more. But unfortunately, I have to say that at SHAC we get, plenty of complaints from people who are living in, fully private rented accommodation, as much as we do from the social tenants and residents. It's still very, very hard for them to enforce their rights. What's likely to happen is that a private tenant who agitates about, conditions of disrepair is likely just to be hit with a no-fault eviction. They're just likely to be evicted by their landlord. So in some ways, they're very, very vulnerable as well. I think in a lot of ways, we want to see an end to that kind of division between the different tenancy types, between the different landlord types. We think there need to be standards that just apply to everybody, that everybody should have access to justice and to decent housing.
Susanna Mee, really good to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much for coming on to react to Becky Johnson's report there. That's Susanna Mee, Secretary of the Social Housing Action Campaign. Thank you.